So here I am in recovery, and I'm hearing all kinds of sounds and whatnot, and there seems to be a tremendous amount of commotion in the bed next to me. And I'm trying not to pay any attention because I really don't want to know what's going on over there, but my attention is drawn. And I hear them saying, Dianne, Dianne. And I'm thinking, isn't that weird that we have the same name? And they're still working on her. And the next thing I'm hearing them say, Dianne Sherman, Dianne Sherman. And I'm thinking, holy crap, that's my name. They've got the wrong patient. So I'm valiantly trying to get their attention. I'm here, and I'm fine. And they're not paying any attention to me. And I'm thinking, well, they're busy. They're working on this person. They're trying to save this person. So they don't hear me or see me. The next thing I know, I'm standing at the bottom of the patient's bed while they're working on her. There are several people on both sides working on her. And I look at her and I realize, whoa, that's me. And the interesting thing was, I didn't have any connection to her. She was me, but I didn't feel anything. It was like somebody said, pass the salt. I had nothing going on with this body in the bed and with what they were doing to her. And I didn't get nervous that, how am I standing here while I'm there? How's that working? Because I had no reference in 1981 for a near-death experience. I'd never heard of it. I'd never talked to anybody. I'd never read anything. Didn't know about Raymond Moody at that point. His book had only been out a couple of years. And I was just kind of like watching what was going on and watching what they were doing. And the sound was sort of not muffled, but muted in a way. So I wasn't caught up in the drama of life-saving work that they were doing. It was just like I was a passerby, kind of, just checking out what was going on. The next thing I knew, I had floated up to the corner. Now I'm looking over everything. And even that wasn't like, how did I get up here? There was none of that. It was just kind of, okay, I'm here and I'm experiencing this and whatnot. And before I knew it, I felt extricated. Something was pulling me out of the room. And then the next feeling was something shoving me. And, even when I say it right now, I can feel my shoulders kind of pushing, resisting that. And I started being shoved forward into blackness. Now, as a kid, I was terrified of being in the dark for various and sundry reasons. But one of them was, there was a thing about being blind, and I still to this day don't know where I got that. But the reference was that, oh my God, I'm blind, I can't see, my worst nightmare, I'm in the dark. And I'm thinking, if I can just see one speck of light, one little flicker of light, I know I'm going to be okay. Because that was always my reference as a kid. If there could be just a little bit of outside light coming in the room, I would be okay. It wouldn't be pitch black. So I'm staring ahead and I see this little tiny, tiny, tiny glimmer of light. And I'm now fixated on it because it's the thing that's going to make this all okay, is if I have that to hold on to, that little bit of light. Because I don't know where I'm going and what I'm doing. If it happened to me today, I would have had it handled. I would have known, you're going in the tunnel. We've read so much about it and heard so much about it, but I had no reference point. I didn't know what was occurring. I didn't know that I was dying or dead. All I knew is that I was in this place and I didn't know what to do about it. So I'm fixated on this glimmer of light, and as I'm staring at it, and all of my attention is going there, it starts to grow. And as it's starting to grow, I know that whatever this is, it's okay. I'm going to be fine. And so I sort of just let the shoulders down, let the thoughts down, just had this sense of all rightness about it. And as I'm still being shoved, there's something now from this light pulling me, kind of coaching me and pulling me towards it. And as I'm getting closer, the light is getting brighter and bigger. And it was almost like in slow motion, I'm just sort of moving, gliding towards this light, towards this experience. And before I realized it, I'm now in the midst of it. It is everywhere. It's everything I can see and experience. It's everywhere.
I'm losing my breath. It just feels like I'm suffocating, I'm just losing my breath, and I'm breathing really deep to try to stay conscious. We get to the emergency room, I'm kind of lightheaded, I'm walking up, and they get me on the gurney, and almost immediately I'm asleep. And I always try to make note of this fact, because people say you're hallucinating, right? But I passed out before I went into the area where they were working on me. But I'm not dead, I don't think, because my perspective is on the bed, like I'm looking that way. But I'm not seeing anything but where the people were. There were dots that almost looked like a nighttime sky. And that stuff was clear to me in that state. But as far as explaining it to my conscious mind, there's no way I could know why I understood what was happening in that moment. After I saw the blackness and the dots where the people were, my perspective shifted, and I was above myself looking down. And I saw the whole setup of the room. I saw where the people were. They were still kind of positioned the way they were when they were pushing me in, but I was able to see, where everybody was at, including a woman that was in the corner of the room. She was holding her face like this, and she was really sad that I was dying. And that was initially when I left my body, that was one of the things that disturbed me the most. It was like, what in the world is she sad for? This is so beautiful. This is so perfect. I'm not hurting, no, I'm not confused. That guy is dead, but I'm alive. This is beautiful, So to me, that just clarifies that it's not a hallucination. I learned while I was out of my body. I saw in real time what was happening to me. And everything, when I opened my eyes, continued in real time. There was no separation in my awareness, gap in between what I was experiencing, whether I was in the body or out of the body. It was a continual flow of experience. Once I did leave my body and I looked down, there was a lot of things that I came to understand. Like, he's dead, his body's dead, the mind is dead, the ego's dead. And after that kind of series of kind of realizations, it was like, well, then what's left? Like, what am I? And the words flooded in very clearly. It was audible. These words were light, energy, soul, spirit, awareness. It's just a flood of words. They weren't in a line like a mechanical. It was like a bunch of voices just said these words. But it felt like it was me explaining this to myself. Everything was energy. Everything felt like love. And I felt like a part of that whole thing. I didn't feel separate from it at all. And everything that I looked at, every question I had, the clarity was instantaneous. And in that process, I was clear. Like I was, what's that? What's that? What's that? It was like a baby having everything was an moment. And I moved from one thing to the next with that childlike wonder and amazement at what I was seeing. There was no memory of this human experience that I was referring any of it back. There was no mind like that. It was just a awareness that was beholding these things and integrating them, and like instantly. So I'm watching everything. I'm watching the woman that's holding her face and just sad about me dying. And after a while, I'm paying attention to stuff, and I just kind of casually take my attention up. And when I do that, instantly I'm in space. There was no tunnel, there was no anything. I quickly became aware of what people call the light. It was up and to the right of me. The emergency room was down and to the left of me. And I was in that angle looking forward out into space. And what was in front of me was the star-forming region. What was beneath me was what people call the void. I felt like I was in the blackness, and it was enveloping me like velvet. It felt like love. It felt like every other aspect of being disembodied in that moment for me. Everything felt like love. I felt like love. I felt like the system that I found myself in was just love, and I was just a part of it. But it also felt like it was everything. It felt like everything, every possibility, every past experience, everything was in the void, was in that black space. When I looked into it, it reacted, it responded. And if there was any kind of thought that wasn't complete, it was complete instantly. If there was a notion of missing something, that the satisfaction of having that, I felt it already. Before the missing was even fully felt, the satisfaction of already having that was there. When I was in space, I was interested in everything, so my attention kind of just moved all around. There was a point where I was looking up at the light, and I was like, it's almost like I was trying to decide if I was going to even entertain it or not. You know, I looked back up at it, and I looked back down into the emergency room. And when my attention went from the upper angle down back to the left, it went through me, and I was just a glowing orb of light. That's what I appeared to be. I had never felt more alive than when I was that glowing orb of light. I had never felt more aware of what was happening on this planet. In that state, I understood everything. The pain, the confusion, the identity stuff was gone. We are all orbs of light. We're not these bodies.
And as I'm laying there, I close my eyes. It's so warm. I see this warm red glowing light all around me. I felt so comforted and protected and loved. So loved. And I didn't know what was to be expected, but I knew the pain is now leaving. The pain is lessening. And I'm laying there with my eyes closed, and I'm feeling this loving warmth all around me. And then I'm watching my body on the couch, watching this frail, tiny little creature on the couch. And I look down, and I look in front of me, and this amazingly beautiful being comes to me. Now I call her my spiritual mother, so I've seen her before. I know I've seen her before. This is not a new experience, so I feel very comforted. No fear, just love in this glowing, rosy light. And she takes me, and she wraps this veily envelope of protection all around me. And I feel so safe, and I'm so warm and comforted with her holding me. And she tells me that we're leaving now. We're leaving now, and I can continue to leave with her. and she tells me, we're going to go to a place that I know, I've been there. That's where we're all from. It's filled with activity. I see that activity. Enormous amount of energy and dynamic colors and feelings of inner soul connection, and I'm feeling this warmth of this, my spiritual mother just holding me as we ascend or go deeper within these realms. And there I am, being told, if we go much further, I can't bring you back. We'll have to decide if you're going to continue or not. And the light was so bright and intense. It was thick with life, thick with being of love and divine sublimeness. The sublimeness of it, I could not remember feeling so and held in that sublime quality. It has a delicacy but a strength that felt so good to be part of, and I wanted to continue with her. And as we are moving deeper and deeper into this light-filled activity, this warmth.
They also gave me an inhaler. This was later on in the day before I left, because it took them a while just to get my oxygen levels back up to normal. And they had told me if I continue feeling this way, that I have to get into the hospital tomorrow. They said, if you feel this way in the morning, just get yourself in the hospital any way you can. And that night turned into a light and love. It was a night of light and love for me. It was magnificent. This near-death experience is so clear, so profound. I remember actually the way I left my body. I seen myself leave my body through my eyes in this beautiful, beautiful glowing mist. It was magnificent. When I was in the mist, now hovering above my body, looking down upon myself, I first recognized myself when I first left my body. I knew it was me. It looked like the body was racked in pain. It wasn't moving. And I believe that from what I remember and was taught on the other is that the spirit waits around the body to make sure the body has no life left in it, that it's completely dead. And I remember hovering for a while, but it got to a point where I started feeling this amazing, beautiful feeling of love. The love was so wonderful. It engulfed me. And at this time now, I didn't even recognize the body on the bed. I was still looking down upon the bed and my body down there. At this time, when the brightness hit, and I don't remember turning, it just automatically turned me. And this beautiful gateway of light opened, and it drew me right in. It drew me right into this unbelievable tunnel of light with magnificent colors. Everything was magnified. It felt to me like hundreds of, maybe thousands of times the beauty of it. And now I started moving. I'm in the tunnel now and I'm moving. And the love I was talking about just a minute ago kept increasing and got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was amazing. I felt like I became the love in this light. And I was moving and the colors was going by me and through me. And I felt like I was going through the universe. It was magnificent. Seeing nebulas going by and beautiful, like Orion and things like that. And then I remember my arrival. And this part was unbelievable because I've been traveling for a while now, but I remember my arrival so clearly. And I said to myself over and over and over again, I'm home. I'm finally home. And then I repeated it again. And then I heard this beautiful, soft voice say, yes, Bill, you're home in the light of our Lord. now I'm actually speaking to others there. I mean, there was family members there, but the person that was speaking to me announced who she was. And she said, "My name is Antonia, and I was with you on your journey home." I didn't even realize she was in the tunnel with me. We were moving at the speed of light. It was unbelievably beautiful.
In the instant of that click, I saw with a kind of clarity that I'd never understood before that I was observing my body dying, but I wasn't dying. That I and my body were somehow two different things. That there was an observer aspect to my own being, my own consciousness, that was, again, entirely, perfectly, clearly conscious and aware, and recognizing that the body was beginning to die. But it, just as with the same crystalline clarity, recognizing that that observing consciousness was not dying. And so it was, again, as if one way of saying it would be that myself, my I, and my body were two different things. And as a part of that recognition then, flooded in an extraordinary freedom, because what that meant in that moment was that the pain in that body was not mine. And so in that moment there was essentially a complete release from the suffering of the situation. It's the first time and it is not the last, it is the first time that I experienced the difference between pain and suffering. Because what I mean to say there is that the pain was not gone. It didn't leave. It didn't magically disappear. It was just recognized immediately and fully that it wasn't me, it wasn't mine, and that even though it was still there and recognizable as pain, I didn't need to be suffering from it. I wasn't suffering from it. There was a complete release in that way. And you can imagine this is day 3 or 4 into my father's care. The surgery was 4 days before I arrived there. It's been a week of this. And so that moment of freedom was staggering on one hand. And it began to turn what had been a very literal experience of complete hell into something as far opposite of that as could be conceived. But that still wasn't the end of the situation here. One of the other things that was immediately apparent in that moment was that life force was draining away at a rate that was relatively slow. I was not going to keel over imminently. It was going to, the way it appeared in that moment was that I probably had a day and a half or 2. And so again, there was this moment of just absolute freedom from the suffering, and the recognition that I got a little time. And so there was no sense of urgency in any way in that. There was really simply almost a sense of, this is so extraordinary, I'm so glad to have some time with it. The third sort of recognition, revelation, realization was that even that sense of an individuated but non-corporeal self was beginning to lose its individuality. And that sense of an individuated self, even if non-corporeal, was beginning to merge into what I certainly at the time could not possibly have put into words, which was merging into what was absolutely vast, what was absolutely overwhelmingly all. It begins difficult to put it into words without sounding either very poetic or very religious. And I actually kind of love all the words that we have for it. And this too was happening at a rate that was kind of slow at first, because it was in exact lockstep with the rate at which that life force was leaving, was the exact rate at which there was this merging with the vastness, merging with the divine, merging with what is absolutely, overwhelmingly all. One of the funny things is that I'm dying, that's very clear, and as a result of all the rest of this, I can't for the life of me think of it as wrong, or bad, or urgent, or as if there was a problem in any way whatsoever. Because with the release from the suffering that is this complete, and with merging into that absolute allness, even just a little, it was impossible for me to conceive of there being anything wrong with that.
I was brought up to the intensive care unit, unconscious, and remained in a coma. And so my NDE experience began in the middle of my cardiac arrest, my resuscitation, coma. I really can't tell you when it began. I can just tell you that the first thing I remember was being in what I would call a black void. I say void because I really didn't see any boundaries, but yet somehow I sensed that this was kind of a holding place. I knew quickly that I was out of my body, and I wasn't afraid at all, actually. There was no fear. It was almost like a very soothing, soft, kind of velvety blackness is the only way I can describe it. It was comforting. And I kind of knew that I would not be here for long. And I thought, well, where am I anyway? And then the thought occurred to me that I was probably dead. And what do all good nurses do when there's something they want to investigate? They do an assessment. And so I actually quickly did the body check. I kind of felt for my arms and my legs and my body and my head. And I was like, okay, no arms, no legs, check, no head. You're definitely out of your body. And I remember being totally fascinated by that, thinking, okay, you really have died. I don't know how this happened, and I really didn't care, actually. I was feeling pretty great, and I still felt like myself. Out of my body, I was just pure awareness. I was slightly aware at that point that there was sort of a light body, is the only way I just could describe it, that there was some light coming from me, although it wasn't very prominent at that point. And when I felt that anticipation of what's next, as soon as that thought occurred to me, I felt my consciousness being propelled out of that black void into what I would only describe as an amazingly beautiful night sky with bright lights and beautiful stars, colors I had never seen, vivid rays of light, and what appeared to be almost a very intricately woven spider web of light. It's the only way I can describe it. The stars, it was almost like I was looking at constellations. And I was a bit of a science nerd, so part of me at that point was kind of looking to see if I could actually recognize constellations, and I didn't. They were completely different formations, but none of them seemed haphazard. They all seemed purposeful. And it was just so beautiful, almost as if you were looking through the most powerful telescope you could ever look through. I remember feeling that I was just suspended in this web. And somehow also, I was aware that I was part of it, which was really interesting. I felt separate at first, and then very quickly felt that not only was I a part of this web of light and purpose, but I was an important part of that web. And this kind of blew me away. I was amazed. I was like, wow, I'm part of this? I really couldn't make sense of it, but I was okay with not understanding how I got there, what this was. I just really allowed myself to kind of feel suspended in that and to just be. There was no place for me to go, no place I wanted to be. I had no sense of my past or my future. In fact, there was no sense of time whatsoever. Everything was happening in the now and all at once, which was a little bit mind-boggling, but I just loved it.
And then my light turned green, and I had to cross all the way over the traffic coming this way to make the left to go towards town. Well, I made it across the first couple of lanes, And then all of a sudden I looked and I can see this car barreling towards me. And this is where everything changed. Time just slowed down almost to a complete stop. And I looked left and I just went, oh, I'm getting ready to die. It was just very matter of fact, because all of a sudden in that moment with everything creeping, you know, when a car is coming at you at a snail's pace, you know, you're not really worried about the impact it's getting ready to make. I look at this and I go, oh, I've done this before. Oh my gosh, I've done this before. Okay, how do you want to do this, kiddo? You know, I can stay in the body and experience the impact and then die, or I can go out of the body, watch the accident take place, and watch the body die. Which one? So I took option B, and because I felt like I didn't need the experience of feeling the pain of that physical impact before death. I felt like I suddenly got it. I knew it. So what was so fascinating at this point was the sound. And this is why I do so much work with frequency, because this is where my understanding of how sound and music and light transpire. I hear this drone. It's this whoa, a low drone. That's the closest sound that I can equate what happened when I was coming out of the body. I have since discovered that low frequency, and remember, low does not mean bad. Low means low frequency. The low vibe was what was keeping my being, my essence, my soul tethered to the physical form. And so that low drone comes in. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is happening. I'm getting ready to die. And suddenly I realize, oh gosh, I've done this so many times before, and there's no fear. It was a very matter of fact, this is happening. And I felt very in charge and very in control of the situation. It wasn't like, oh my God, you know, I'm too young. I'm only 21. I have so much life to live. It wasn't like that at all. And so I'm coming up and out of the body, and the best way I have ever found to describe that is if someone was outside and they were doing lawn work, or, you know, they were out in the sun and they were hot and they were sweaty, and they came inside and they peeled off those dirty, nasty clothes and they threw them next to the washing machine, and they went up and had the best shower ever, and they're washing all the muck and the dirt and the grime off. The last thing they're thinking about is the clothes next to the washing machine. And so when you come up and out of the body, the last thing you're thinking about is that physical form. It's just a vehicle that the you, the real you, has been using to traverse this particular lifetime. But we're so critical of the physical form because so often while we're here and we're deeply immersed in the experience, we identify as the physical form. And what happened in that moment was I suddenly remembered again. Everything just started coming back at lightning speed. And I remembered, oh my gosh, I'm not that body. That body is just how I've been getting around. So I am now up and out, and everything is still going in slow motion. That sound is still wafting through the air in the background. And now when I have this bird's eye view and I'm able to look down at the accident, boom, everything just goes back to normal speed again. And I watch this old man plow into the side of my car. I'm driving here. He hits me into the driver's side. It's what they call a T-bone, where the car is crushed here. So the car is crushing in here, and I am literally spectating my own death. I watch my head go through the window. My neck breaks. I am pinned to the seat of the car. The seat folds up. Glass is going into my legs. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. There was no sense of mourning or trying to get back into the body really quick. No, I'm dying. It just wasn't like that because I wasn't dead. The body was dying. I was perfectly great and intact and suddenly becoming a whole hell of a lot smarter than I'd been 5 seconds earlier. Because all of my memories, the veil of forgetfulness that you have to have in order to come here and immerse into this experience is suddenly pulled off. So I am now looking down. Cars are screeching to a halt. And what was so fascinating, and talk about timing, is Charleston at the time was probably about 350,000 people in the city. 2 cars behind me at that stoplight was a girl that I had shared the dorm with when I was in college. She watched the entire accident take place. So here I am out of body, and I can suddenly feel her recognizing me and the vehicle. And I could feel her pain, I could feel her terror. And it was so funny because it was hers, not mine. She was the one who was attached to the death, not me. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it's like you want to shake everybody. You want to run around and tell everybody that you can. Guys, it's just like walking through a door. There's nothing to be afraid of here. It's like coming in and kicking your shoes off. You don't care about the shoes anymore. The real you is still walking around the house in your bare feet. Those were just shoes. And it's the most incredible sensation. It was one of absolute elation. I remember why I came here. I remember who I am. I remember what's happening. And I'm like bathing in this light. It was like it was in me. Did you ever hear a piece of music that just moves your soul? Like it's got some kind of chord in it that just makes you tingle all over. You can literally feel the piece of music moving through you. Well, that's a little bit what that's like on steroids, you know? It's this feeling of being a complete and utter part of the atmosphere around you, of knowing all of a sudden, oh, this is what eternal feels like. This is what I am part of everything feels like. But the best part is, you know, you've just come out of the human form and you're like, oh my God, I still know who I am. What a relief, because I don't care what anybody says. Part of being human is having fear and having uncertainty. And no matter how many times I got visited by my dead grandfather or predicted the death of someone down the road, I still worried as a kid that when I died, I might forget who I had been. I would cease to exist. And I didn't like the idea of what I'd listen to in church either, that, you know what, I'm going to be sitting on a cloud playing a harp or something. You know, all of a sudden I'm in this space realizing, oh my gosh, none of that is real. What's real is me right now. So you're in this space and you're bathing in this new understanding and new remembrance of who and what you really are. Your body's dead down there in the car. And I'm watching all these people gathering around. So you can imagine, I look dead. I'm laying there, you know, broken. I watched the old roommate's reaction. But then I stayed around long enough and I saw the ambulance arrive. And there was this guy in a uniform. He came up. He reached through, because all the windows had blown out of the car, and he reached through the passenger side and he turned the ignition off. Well, I realized that this was the policeman that was the first to arrive on the scene. And there was this lady, and I can remember her so well. And she was either on her way somewhere else or she didn't really want to get involved. But I remember her writing down her phone number and her name, walking up to the car. Now imagine doing this. You've got like a dead person in the car, and you walk up and you leave your name and phone number on the passenger seat just in case anybody needs to chat. I always thought that was so weird. And even in that moment, it really stood out to me. Well, next thing, all of a sudden, the sound begins to change. So we go from this kind of wah, wah, low drone sound to this more beautiful orchestral, I call it the music of the spheres, this symphony of sounds that don't sound like any kind of music that we have here. So I can't even really adequately describe it to you because I've never been able to hear it here or recreate it here. And it's now changing with my vision and my experience. So that lower drone that I said was kind of keeping me tethered to the body is now exchanged for this higher sound. And now I'm no longer at the scene of the accident. So whoosh. This is where I think other people who've had near-death experiences talk about the tunnel of light, going through this kind of light. I missed it. It happened so quickly. I was here 1 second, and then I was here. And so in this new space that I arrived in, it was so wild because it was like the atmosphere was palpable. It was like I was part of the atmosphere that was around me. And here's what's really interesting. So long gone is my fear that, you know, you're dead and cease to exist. I'm like, I am tangible. I am something. I even had this feeling of a sense of form. I wasn't just like some blob of light and love floating around. I felt like I had texture and shape.
We made the drive down and pulled into the hospital emergency room, and the doctor was there. They rushed me into the operating room just as quick as they could, because my thumb was dislocated and the only thing that was holding my thumb together was the skin hanging down. What they do is they put a tourniquet here on your arm, and it's done of air. It's an air tourniquet. It has 2 valves on it, and those valves are used to release the pressure. But the nurse says, I've never done this procedure before. And the doctor says, I can talk you through this procedure because what you're doing is you're opening and closing valves for pressure use. I sat there on the table and I was listening to him, and everything was going just fine. And they did the local on me so that I would not feel when he cut me open and started to put my thumb back together again. As time went, I started feeling pressure right here in my arm, and it was pressure that didn't feel very good. And so I asked for them to, do something about it, and the nurse opened the valve and it released the pressure, and I started feeling real good again. But as time went, the pressure started coming back on again. And when the nurse went to release the valve, she forgot to tighten the other valve first. And so I felt the something go up my arm, across my chest, and into my heart. Now, the next thing I knew, I was sitting above my body. It was the most incredible experience that anyone could experience. Watching yourself on the table, laid out, and watching the doctor operate on me and continue to do the operation. But the fearful thing was when, not for me, but I could see it in the doctor, was when the nurse went running out of the room and said that she had killed me. I was standing above my body, and there was someone else sitting by me. It was a person that I could never look at, but I knew they were there. And when they would talk through their mind, and I would talk back to them through my mind. Now, during the operation, I could sit there and watch the doctor and the people that were there trying to revive me. I could hear them talking, and I could see the commotion going on in the room. But the doctor was so diligent in finishing his surgery that I was quite impressed, and the person that was sitting next to me was happy with what was going on. It was the most peaceful feeling that I have ever experienced. Even now, I go back to that feeling of peace that I felt. I did not know the person that was next to me, but I'll recognize that voice if I hear it again. And I knew that that person was there to help me. Some people believe in guardian angels. I, for one, now believe in guardian angels because he was sitting right next to me, and I know it was a man. But we sat and we watched it. We watched him cut me open, lay out my thumb, and I watched him put a pin in right through the bone that's right here to hold it in place. I remember the pin sticking out just a little bit further than what it was supposed to. And I remember him going in and cutting it and making it so that it wouldn't protrude through the skin. But then there became a time where the person next to me said it was time to go. I knew that there was no doubt in my mind that it was time to go, and where I was going I didn't know. But what happened next was almost like a twinkling of an eye, and I was standing in an open field. It was the most beautiful surrounding that I could have ever been in.
It's very difficult right now for us not to be preoccupied with the fact that I'm on a camera and I'm talking to you and you're in Iowa and I'm in California, and all those qualities in the dimension where things are dualistic and change. But when in fact we're approaching death and our bodies and our personalities are falling away, what is it that remains? What remains is consciousness, living spirit. And in a very real sense, all of spiritual practice is about coming to that understanding. Mm-hmm. That yes, we have a body, yes, we have a personality, yes, there is this dimension where everything changes. Our bodies change, our minds change. But is there a dimension where nothing is changing? where each moment consciousness is receiving experience. So when we're dying, it's much easier to remember that second dimension, that second quality of who we are. And it may sound strange, but the most beautiful Americans that I've ever met, with very few exceptions, are people who are almost dead because they are willing to be more fully who they are. Everything else is being stripped away. All of our attachments, all of our identities, male, female, rich, poor, big, small, all those things become increasingly irrelevant. The Tibetans say that when you die, one of the first things that happens right after you die is a light appears that is as bright as 1,000 suns. So if during your life, during my life, we have practiced not only letting go of all these attachments that will appear as being stung by 1,000 bees, we have also practiced dying into the light, experiencing love and joy, then dying will be another moment of dying into joy. So in life, often spiritual practice takes the form of working with compassion, working with the stuff that's difficult. We come to spiritual practice because we want to be happier. At the same time, there's a parallel practice, which maybe is even more difficult, which is learning to bear how incredibly and perfectly beautiful and love-filled existence truly is. So to the extent we can do that, then after we die and we go into this after-death state where the light appears, if we have practiced being in that non-dual joyfulness, then we're home. To the extent that it's too bright, then all these potential bee stings that are exactly what's making it feel like it's too bright will begin to appear. And we have the opportunity then to let go of those attachments. And it's a much easier opportunity than it is right now, because we don't have a body and a personality and we're in the light. But it is still our karma that's appearing at that moment. The longer I've done this work, the less I think it's about dying and the more I think it's about healing. So that whether you believe in reincarnation or heaven and hell or Shirley MacLaine or whatever metaphysical viewpoint you might happen to have, what interests me is, what can I or you do right now that will help us awaken and die into our identity as love? So actually, one time somebody asked the Buddha, does reincarnation exist? And the Buddha said, well, if it does exist, then how would you live your life? And the fellow said, well, because I would want a good next birth, I would meditate a lot and study the scriptures and be an all-around nice guy. And the Buddha said, well, if reincarnation doesn't exist, how would you live? And he said, well, because this would be my only chance. I would really meditate a lot and really study the scriptures and be an all-around nice guy. And the Buddha said, just so, it doesn't really make any difference. It's all just metaphysics. So the fact that death exists, whether that's the end or whether it's the beginning of something new, a transition into the next thing, what practices, what attitudes, what ways of living can we find right now that will heal us, bring us into wholeness, so that our approaching that eventual and inevitable moment of dying will not be filled with fear, will be filled with love and openness.